In the wild places of Scotland, where skies are often grey and the mountain streams swollen with rain, there's still room for the natural balance between the hunters and the hunted. Yet now, except for the remotest areas, the balance between predators and their prey is often controlled and manipulated by man. The red grouse, unique to Britain, and the dominant species of the endless heather moors, has as its chief predator the golden eagle, the king of the hunters, the largest of all the Scottish birds of prey. Each pair of eagles needs thousands of acres to provide enough food for themselves and their offspring, and a suitable nest site, usually on a crag in the remoter parts of the hills. Here they normally rear one chick, sometimes two. An eagle's weapons are formidable, especially the massive beak for tearing the tough sinews of mountain hare or red grouse. Yet eagles are cowardly characters, timid, easily scared from the nest, to which they will seldom return in less than 2 or 3 hours once disturbed. There are something like 300 pairs of eagles in Scotland, probably about as many as the country can hold, of a bird that demands such a large territory. There's literally no room for many more, and since the worst of the toxic chemicals were banned on the farms, the eagle's breeding rate has recovered, and their future seems secure. Not so happy is the case of the peregrine falcon, which also nests mostly on cliff sites well away from the beaten track. And what a contrast with the eagle is the screaming, defiant falcon, clinging to the skies above the nest site, resentful of our invasion. This pair are nesting in the foothills in a rocky gully, using an old nest, a huge structure of sticks, built in January by a pair of ravens, which are always early nesters. Peregrines themselves make no nest, often laying their brown eggs on the bare earth of a ledge, usually under an overhang on an inaccessible cliff. At this site, the chick waits for his meal in a luxury home lined with sheep's wool and grass, a broad platform that has already earlier in the year seen a family of young ravens hatch out and grow to the flying stage. Now the single surviving peregrine chick is just beginning to show his first real plumage. His first brown feathers are still enclosed in those blue quill cases as they start to sprout through the white down on wings and tail. The peregrine is a pursuit hunter, stooping at frightening speeds, to strike its prey in mid-air, often taking the head clean off a pigeon at the first terrifying impact, and then dropping the corpse to be picked up later and brought back to the chick now screaming with hunger. Overhead, the tiercel soars, watching. But it is the falcon, the female of the pair, who tears up the juicy red meat of the pigeon prey and feeds it in dainty morsels to the chick. No wonder this was the falcon of kings. And what a fascinating picture she makes with her black moustache and those beautifully striped trousers on her yellow legs. Recently it seemed as though the peregrine was fast disappearing, just because she was at the end of a food chain that starts with grain treated with poisons, which accumulate first in the pigeons that eat the grain, and then in the falcons that eat the pigeons. And it's sad that this splendid bird had to be the early warning to man of the risks of injecting deadly persistent chemicals into the biological systems of nature. Scotland is a country with a rich variety of scenery, mountain and moorland, forests and lochs. But only one bird of prey really needs the water for survival, the osprey, the hawk that dives into water feet first to snatch a fish from the shallows. The osprey also needs the forest, for it builds its nest invariably on top of a forest pine. Luckily, plenty of places in Scotland have this combination of forest and fresh water. And this, the most handsome of all our birds of prey, is making a remarkable comeback. Once, ospreys were common. Then they became rare and so the victims of collectors of their eggs and skins. Finally, at the end of the 19th century, they were wiped out, and for 60 years there was no breeding in Scotland. Then in the 1950s, a few migrant ospreys stayed in the valley of the River Spey for the summer, attempted to nest for several years, and finally, in 1958, laid eggs. This nest was robbed, but in 1959 they tried again and succeeded in rearing the first family this century. Since then, under the careful protection of the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, they have nested every year and have now established about 15 breeding pairs. 2 sites are open to the public and attract 150,000 visitors a year. But here, in a secret locality, on a private estate, they nest unobserved. Every day, the male osprey leaves his perch 5 or 6 times to go off to loch or estuary to fish for the family. They seem to take mostly pike or trout, the male bird invariably doing the fishing, while the female seldom leaves the area of the nest for nearly 4 months from April to July. Now, flying with a large fish presents problems, especially air resistance. He solves it by carrying the fish fore and aft, with his talons hooked firmly into its back, while he performs his swooping display to the waiting female. She's now growing hungry and impatient on the eyrie. Usually, he plays the dominant role of the male, helping himself first to the head of the fish on a nearby perch in full view of the patient female. But soon she gets irritated and starts to complain by chivying him with wheezing calls. At times he pays so little attention to her complaints that it seems as if he was almost deliberately making her wait. But eventually he relents and flies into the nest with the supper at last. Although he always catches the food, yet once again it is the hen osprey who invariably feeds the fish to the young, tearing off the flesh with that superbly hooked beak. By using the strength the chicks do not yet have, the vital pull between talons and beak that enables all the birds of prey to survive. Sometimes the family peace is broken by an intruder, this time a young non-breeding bird from a nearby territory. To the territory owners this is an invasion, and immediately they set up an explosive and noisy threat display from the treetop eyrie. Normally, ospreys are quiet and unobtrusive birds at the nest, but the territory is sacrosanct, and the presence of this rival osprey, or another predator like a buzzard, rouses the pair to this wing-waving threat display. When this is not enough to deter the enemy, the cock takes to aerial pursuit and chases the rival out of the territory. Again, the female's instinct is to stay put, leaving the male as the active partner who only returns to the nest when the rival has been finally driven off. So the female can return to her feeding duties again, and the male returns to his usual perch. While things are normal and undisturbed, the osprey's family life is astonishingly quiet, and for all their size, they can easily be missed. Left undisturbed, they will rear their young to the flying stage by late July, and in August will migrate south to the Mediterranean and Africa. On the heather hills of the lowland country near the English border, there's an unusual occupant of an old crow's nest in a lone rowan tree in a tiny valley. It's a merlin chick, and merlins normally nest on the ground in the long heather that clothes thousands of acres of this moorland. This is the smallest of the falcons, fast-flying, handsome, rather rare now, and only about the size of a thrush or a cuckoo. This is the dapper little bird that used to be thought of as the lady's falcon, and no wonder. Merlins live in lonely hill country, where lapwings make their ground nests and lay their eggs, guarded fiercely against rivals of their own species. But lapwings themselves have little to fear from the merlin returning home with food for its chick. Merlins feed chiefly on the small birds that are so numerous on this hill grassland. Nobody knows just why their numbers are declining, as there seem to be plenty of larks and pipits that they feed on. It's a pity they're becoming rare, for this is an attractive species, and not least when sitting tight on this unusual nest in a windswept treetop, in spite of a fresh summer breeze. And then there's the hen harrier. The cock flies over the young forest where wrens sing in summer. And the female, with that white patch at the base of her tail, is also distinctive in flight, a large round-winged bird. Ground nesters, they favour the vast areas of young spruce plantations now being established all over Scotland. The hen harrier normally nests in reeds or long heather, and the young show the characteristic round-faced appearance of these owl-like hawks. Half grown, they show in brown new feathers the crescent-shaped ear coverts. They're not yet strong enough to stand up on their own feet for long, and certainly not to hold down their own food. So, like most young predators, for many weeks, even after fledging, they will be dependent on their parents, both to hunt and kill for them, and to tear up the food into edible portions. Today, the hen has only some remains of food left from the last kill, and she's waiting for the male to return from a hunting foray. She waits to see if he has been successful, and when he flies in low over the trees, close enough for her to see that he is carrying prey in his talons, she takes off to catch the food from him in a food pass executed above the nest site in mid-air. Perfect timing. And once again it's the female who returns with the prey and performs the feeding duties at the nest, which is seldom visited by the male. This time it looks like a young nestling that he has caught. And by now, the chicks show that they're nearly strong enough to feed themselves, and, quite literally, to stand on their own feet. Much of Scotland, like this Perthshire valley, is a pleasant farming landscape, but with enough pine plantations to offer a home to the yellow-eyed sparrowhawk, a fast-flying hunter who uses the surprise technique to snatch small birds out of the air by a superb coordination of eyes and wings and talons. In the same sort of country, but using a cliff site for a nest, or often an old ivy-covered building, lives the commonest of all Scottish birds of prey, the kestrel. The male is as handsome as they come, striped front, rusty back, grey head, dark eyes. And the kestrel is one of the few birds of prey that has a quite distinctive method of hunting, instantly recognizable because no other bird does quite the same as the windhover. Where the sparrowhawk lives on small birds, the kestrel lives mostly on small mammals, on the mice and voles that are so numerous in all grassland. The kestrel is fast and can twist and turn and swoop as quick as lightning. But his standard method is this patient searching of the ground by hovering. The eyes are vital. It takes very accurate focusing to spot a tiny movement of the grass 50 feet below. The vital factor is that the eye should be held absolutely still in relation to the object it is focused on. Sometimes, when hovering in a sheltered place, the kestrel can keep its head still by slight movements of the tail, but when he swoops up to hang in the breeze over an exposed hillside, watch how he seems to fix himself onto his background, almost as though he was hooked by his beak onto your screen, so that everything is moving, wings, tail, body, yet like a miracle the focusing eyes held rigidly still in relation to the prey below. So the kestrel succeeds, and now nests all over the countryside, and also in many town and city sites too. Motorway verges and roadside grass have become a favourite hunting ground, with inevitable casualties. This male, for instance, has now only one wing, the other shorn off by a car at high speed. He'll never hover or hunt again, so we keep him in an aviary and give him his daily ration of mouse or vole or day-old chick. He thrived, and so we found him a mate, and after one failure they laid eggs. On a never-to-be-forgotten day in May, we suddenly realized that the eggs, still unhatched, were what was squeaking. The chick was on the point of breaking through, so we hastily returned the eggs to the nest on the floor of the breeding hut. 6 eggs had been laid and 5 of them hatched, and we were able to follow the family through all the stages of their fantastically rapid growth. Look how much they have grown in the first few days after hatching. At this stage, the female still spends much of her time brooding the family to keep them warm. By 10 days old, they were able to stagger about on the floor of their nesting place, already 10 times the size of the one infertile egg that hadn't hatched. The hen still tried her best to cover them, but they were already too much for her to brood easily. At 19 days, their feathers were really sprouting, and feeding time was a noisy and competitive performance. The mother kestrel was also a road casualty with a dislocated and drooping wing, but this didn't prevent her rearing this family of 5. When it's a question of only 2 alternatives, to kill or to keep, then surely here we have made the right choice. Finally, at 5 weeks, the young kestrels are fully fledged, and unlike their less fortunate parents, perfect specimens that will eventually fly and hover and hunt as nature intended. Thank goodness at least this one of the Scottish birds of prey is numerous and not in need of protection. In Britain, all birds are protected by law, and the rarer ones, like the osprey, are guarded by special penalties and by popular goodwill. For in Scotland, it's the osprey and the story of its comeback which has really hit the headlines. Yet still there are those who shoot or persecute the predators in the often mistaken belief that they reduce the overall numbers of game birds. In Scotland, there is still room for both the predators and their prey, room for research into their way of life, and for enjoyment of the living landscape where they too have a place.